10,000 years ago, slow shifts in Earth's orbit intensified the African monsoon, pushing heavy rains far to the north. Over several thousand years, the arid Sahara transformed into sweeping expanses of wetlands, massive freshwater lakes, and vibrant savanna. The people who lived there etched their daily reality directly into the rock faces. Across what is now hyper-arid desert, we find vivid depictions of hippos, rhinos, and giraffes, animals that require massive amounts of vegetation and water, species that today only survive thousands of miles to the south. Because this environment was hospitable for roughly 9 millennia, researchers long assumed it functioned as an open corridor. Intuitively, a lush central landmass connecting Europe, the Near East, and sub-Saharan Africa should have operated as a crossroads, with migrating populations constantly meeting and mixing their DNA. The evidence to test that assumption finally emerged from a natural rock shelter called Takakaro Kori, located deep within the severe, sun-baked isolation of southwestern Libya's Caucasus Mountains. The remains unearthed inside Takakaro Kori lacked the heavy genetic blending researchers expected. Instead of a melting pot of ancient travelers, scientists identified a distinct, isolated ghost lineage, revealing that the Green Sahara was a sanctuary for a population that largely stayed in place. Within the shelter, archaeologists discovered the remains of 15 people, including 2 women buried around 7,000 years ago. The extreme dryness of the Libyan desert had acted as a natural desiccant, halting the decay process and naturally mummifying their bodies, leaving skin, tissues, and even ligaments partially intact. Extracting DNA from such an environment is difficult, as heat typically shreds genetic material. However, by targeting the exceptionally dense petrous bone near the inner ear, geneticists were able to sequence their entire, complete genomes, the first time this level of detail was retrieved from such a challenging climate. Observational. This chart illustrates the contrast between these women and surrounding populations. While genomes from the Near East, Europe, and sub-Saharan Africa show multicolored variants from constant mixing, the Takarakuri DNA is an entirely distinct, solid genetic profile with 0 significant input from outside groups. Extending that data backward, the timeline traces this specific lineage splitting off from the rest of humanity roughly 50,000 years ago. While other groups migrated outward and populated the globe, the ancestors of these Takarakuri women remained separate, preserving an unmixed biological line for tens of thousands of years. A population thriving in a resource-rich environment usually experiences heavy genetic exchange with outsiders. Finding an unbroken biological island persisting right in the middle of a habitable savanna challenges our model of how ancient populations behaved in these zones. While their genetics remained static, their daily lives did not. The artifacts surrounding the Takarakuri remains prove these people were highly adaptable, adopting new lifestyles and tools as their environments slowly evolved over thousands of years. Scattered among the ancient fishing harpoons, researchers found markers of a major lifestyle shift. The rock art left by this exact population vividly illustrates them managing and herding domesticated animals. This was a shift from hunting and gathering to a managed food supply, a practice that began in the Near East long before those animals appeared in North Africa. If these herding techniques originated in the Levant and eventually reached this isolated pocket of the Sahara, we should see the genetic footprint of Near Eastern farmers who brought the animals with them. Yet, the DNA of the Takarakuri women shows no trace of Near Eastern ancestry. We generally assume that in ancient history, physical migrations drove progress. The assumption is that to get new tools, a new population had to move in and settle down. The Takarakuri site proves this is not always the case. The evidence points to a different mechanism. The technology of herding reached this isolated Saharan group through the transmission of ideas, passing from person to person without a corresponding influx of foreign genes. Rather than an invading wave of Near Eastern farmers taking over the landscape, the technology moved through localized networks. It spread via small-scale interactions and regional trade, with communities learning from their neighbors over long stretches of time. The artifacts confirm this localized approach. The pottery and tools found at Takarakuri, used to manage these domesticated herds, were distinctly North African in their style. They took the external concept of pastoralism and manufactured their own local equipment to execute it. This map visualization illustrates the concept of cultural contagion. The wave representing the behavioral idea of animal herding sweeps across the North African continent, while the distinct genetic markers of the local populations sitting directly beneath that wave remain unmixed. Humans could share complex agricultural concepts through networking alone. A society could adopt the most advanced technologies of their era while maintaining their distinct biological identity from outsiders. Roughly 5,000 years ago, those same planetary mechanics shifted once again. Earth's tilt varied, the African monsoon failed, and the lakes rapidly evaporated. The Sahara reverted into a desert, finally forcing this population to abandon their long-held sanctuary. They dispersed primarily to the north and the west. Today, their specific genetic markers, particularly paternal lineages originating over 14,000 years ago, form the foundational DNA of modern North African and Berber-speaking populations. But fragments of this DNA traveled much further. Trace amounts of that exact ancient North African paternal marker are concentrated along the Atlantic coast of Europe today, even appearing in roughly 1% of modern Scottish men. The corresponding maternal marker from this ancient North African population tells a similar story. Geneticists have identified it buried within Neolithic remains excavated in Spain, northern Portugal, and coastal Ireland. We find a cross-section of this journey preserved on the Canary Islands. Before European contact, the indigenous Guanche people carried both the maternal and paternal Saharan markers, preserving the oldest known Berber DNA in the Atlantic. Plotting these markers on a map outlines a distinct coastal path. It suggests the existence of ancient maritime trade routes, connecting the shores of North Africa to Iberia and the fringes of the British Isles long before recorded history. The collapse that dried out the Green Sahara did not erase its people. Their biological descendants navigated the oceans, weaving their genetic echoes into the early populations of Western Europe. Physical excavations support the DNA. Archaeologists in Ireland unearthed the skull of a Barbary macaque, an ape native to North Africa, dating back to 400 BCE. A live ape does not cross thousands of miles of ocean accidentally. It requires deliberate human transport. These ancient interactions also left shadows in human language. Linguists have documented deep structural parallels between early Celtic languages and North African Berber dialects, and even stranger overlaps linking the Basque language of the Pyrenees to ancient Sumerian. This is the Great Ziggurat of Ur in modern-day Iraq. Sumerian, the language once spoken here, shares rare grammatical structures with Basque, spoken thousands of miles away in Europe. These connections suggest a shared ancestral language spoken by the first farmers who expanded out from the Near East. Just as the Takarakori group remained separate in the desert, the Basque and Sumerians likely acted as linguistic islands, preserving ancient speech patterns that were elsewhere replaced by later migrations. The story of the Green Sahara proves that ancient populations were not always moving or mixing. They could remain biologically distinct for millennia, while their cultural innovations traveled across the globe, leaving traces in our modern DNA, our artifacts, and the very ways we speak.